When my daughter told me she was blocking my number, I felt like someone had ripped a part of me away. I sat frozen in my living room, staring at the screen, unable to believe what I had just heard. She had just won $50 million in a lottery, a life-changing, dream-come-true windfall, and instead of celebrating together, she was shutting me out completely. She didn't just ignore me, she erased me from her life. I whispered to myself, my hands trembling. The phone sat there silently, mocking me. No text, no call, no explanation, nothing. In one swift swipe, she had cut the person who had supported her through every heartbreak, scraped knee, and sleepless night. I remember that moment vividly. The crushing weight of disbelief, the sting of betrayal, and the unbearable ache in my chest. Money, I thought, could never change her. She was my little girl, the one who used to curl into my arms when the thunder scared her, the one who would bring me flowers she picked herself, thinking she was surprising me. But now she had vanished behind the cold, unfeeling glow of a bank balance. Mom, I don't need anyone right now, she had texted earlier, her words polite but distant. And yet, blocking me? That was something else entirely. I felt the walls of my home closing in. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the phone refused to respond. It was like the universe itself had conspired to humiliate me at the very moment I should have been celebrating my daughter's success. I thought back to all the moments we shared, how I had stayed up nights helping her with school projects, attended every recital, every game, every tiny milestone. I had celebrated her victories, comforted her in losses, and now she treated me like a stranger. My heart pounded as a chill ran down my spine. What had I done wrong? What had I missed? But then a shadow of doubt crept in. Little did she know, the real power in this story wasn't hers. That $50 million may have changed her circumstances, but it hadn't changed the truth. And the truth, I realized, was about to shift in ways she could never imagine. I paced back and forth, replaying her actions in my head. That text, that block, it was deliberate. And yet, a strange thought began to form in the recesses of my mind. What if this wasn't just about money or rebellion? What if there was something she hadn't seen? Something lurking behind her sudden windfall? I could feel a storm brewing, and I knew deep down that 72 hours from that moment, everything would turn upside down. The tables would shift. And when it did, the one who had seemed untouchable, the one who had wielded her wealth like a weapon, would be the one standing at my door, begging for mercy. I sank into the couch, my hands gripping the cushions. I whispered aloud, almost to myself, almost as a prayer, I don't know how this is going to end, but I do know this. In just 3 days, everything she thinks she owns will not protect her from what I've discovered. And just as the fear and sorrow threatened to swallow me whole, a flicker of determination ignited within me. The kind of determination that only comes when a parent realizes that betrayal isn't the end. It's the beginning of uncovering a truth that could change everything. I looked at the clock. 72 hours. That was all I had to prepare for the moment when she would come knocking, tears in her eyes, desperate for something she thought she had outgrown, her family, her guidance, her home. I leaned back, letting the weight of the situation settle. When my daughter told me she was blocking me, I knew my life had changed. But 72 hours later, she would be the one begging for mercy, because she never expected what I was about to uncover next. Little did she know, the story wasn't about her money. It was about the truth she had ignored, the mistakes she had made, and the reckoning that was already on its way. And when it came, there would be no escaping it. Before the chaos, before the heartbreak, before my daughter's sudden fortune and cold betrayal, I was just a mother trying to do my best. Ordinary, loving, loyal. Someone who poured every ounce of energy into raising a child with love, patience, and endless encouragement. I remember the quiet mornings, making her favorite breakfast before school, even when I barely had the energy to lift my own head off the pillow. The evenings spent helping with homework, reviewing essays, solving math problems I hadn't touched in years. And the nights were mine alone, pacing the floor, praying she would always have the strength to pursue her dreams. Life wasn't perfect. Far from it. Bills piled up. Work was exhausting. There were nights I cried alone in the kitchen, pretending to the world that everything was fine. But she was my light, the reason I got up every morning. I celebrated every small victory she had. The science project she poured her heart into, the medal she won in a school race, the tiny moments that mattered more than anyone else could see. I trusted her implicitly. She was my little girl, the one who told me everything, her fears, her dreams, her doubts. I thought our bond was unbreakable. I had never doubted her love or loyalty, never imagined a world where she would turn her back on me. Even when she started talking about the lottery, I was cautiously hopeful. I warned her of the dangers of sudden wealth, the people who could take advantage, but I believed in her judgment. I believed that she would remember everything I had taught her: kindness, honesty, respect, and the value of family. I had my own losses too. Years ago, I had lost someone close, a friend, a mentor, someone whose absence left a deep void in my life. But I never let it harden me. I poured my grief into love, into nurturing my daughter, into making sure she never felt the emptiness I had felt. And for a while, it worked. We were a team, inseparable. I wasn't wealthy, glamorous, or extraordinary. I was a parent doing the best I could with the hand I was dealt. But my life had purpose because of her. She was my pride, my joy, the reason every struggle felt worth it. I trusted her because she had always been trustworthy. I trusted her because she was my child, and I thought our bond was stronger than anything else. Little did I know that trust was about to be weaponized against me. Little did I know that the daughter I had raised with so much love would, in a matter of hours, wield her newfound wealth like a shield and a sword against me. I had no idea that $50 million could suddenly make her feel she didn't need me anymore. Even now, I remember the mornings we laughed together, the quiet evenings we shared secrets, the long drives filled with stories and dreams. That was my life, filled with ordinary love, devotion, and hope. And in hindsight, every one of those moments made the betrayal sting even more, because I had invested everything into her. My time, my energy, my heart. And when she blocked my number and disappeared behind the illusion of her fortune, I realized just how fragile trust could be, even with someone you love more than life itself. Before everything changed, I was a mother, ordinary but devoted. I was human, vulnerable, and trusting. And that vulnerability, that trust was what made the events of the next 72 hours not just shocking but transformative. At first, the signs were almost invisible, like whispers in a storm. Little things I brushed off because I wanted to believe my daughter was still the same person I had raised. But hindsight has a cruel way of showing you the truth. It started with her tone. Casual, almost dismissive. "Mom, I've got this covered," she would say, waving off my advice like it was a nuisance. I thought it was just teenage or maybe early adult confidence, a natural reaction to sudden independence. But it was more than that. She began making decisions without me. Not the small, harmless ones like what to eat or wear, but major choices about money, friends, and her lifestyle. When I tried to step in, gently, she shrugged it off. "I don't need anyone to manage my life, Mom. I can handle this." That tiny phrase would echo in my mind later, haunting me. A subtle first strike of the emotional distance that was forming between us. Then came the fake concern, the kind designed to keep me off balance. She would text, "Don't worry, Mom. I'm being careful," and I would nod, trusting her words. But her actions didn't match them. Friends I didn't know were suddenly involved in her life. Plans I wasn't aware of were being made. Money was moving, not always in ways I could track. The red flags were there, but they were hidden under a veneer of polite words and smiles. Her sense of entitlement grew almost overnight. It wasn't just the money. It was the way she carried herself, the way she looked at me sometimes, as if I didn't quite understand the world she had suddenly entered. She expected me to adjust, to accept her new reality without question. And at first I tried. I told myself this was natural, that she needed space, that perhaps her excitement had clouded her judgment. The disrespect was subtle, but intentional. Little digs here and there. "You wouldn't get it, Mom," she said once when I tried to advise her about a financial decision. Or the time she rolled her eyes when I reminded her to eat before leaving for an event. "I'm fine," she said, her tone sharp, a flicker of impatience in her eyes. Even family gatherings changed. I noticed how she started to exclude me from conversations, how she would text under the table, seemingly preoccupied with other people or other plans. I felt invisible, but I told myself it was just part of growing up. I tried to be patient, to be understanding. After all, we had been through so much together. But the warning signs were multiplying. Subtle manipulations became routine. She would promise to call, only to ignore me. She would invite me along to an event, then cancel last minute. Each time, a small fracture appeared, and with each fracture, my worry grew. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't yet name it. The turning point in this stage came the night she won the lottery. I had expected joy, laughter, maybe even tears of happiness we could share together. Instead, she hugged me briefly, then pulled away, almost as if she were holding herself at arm's length. Later, the first text arrived. "Mom, don't call me right now. I need space." I thought I could respect her need, but deep down, a pit of unease had formed in my stomach. Then came the moments that made my heart ache. Friends I didn't recognize, decisions made without me, and a growing arrogance I hadn't seen before. It wasn't just money. It was a shift in her perception of herself, a subtle but undeniable superiority. She was no longer my little girl. She was someone different, someone who seemed to think she was untouchable. And in those early red flags, I began to sense a pattern, a roadmap of what was coming next. The disrespect, the dismissal, the manipulations, they weren't random. They were small pieces of a larger puzzle, one that I would only fully understand after the first devastating blow. Looking back, I see it clearly now. Each small act of defiance, each casual lie, each ignored call was a warning. But at the time, I was blinded by love, by hope, by the desperate desire to believe that my daughter could never hurt me intentionally. That was the calm before the storm. The red flags were there, growing more vivid by the hour, but I couldn't yet see the full picture. And little did I know, the day she blocked my number, the day my world shifted, was built on these small betrayals. It was subtle, almost invisible, but the stage had been set. And when the next moment came, the one that would push me to the brink, it would feel like the entire world had turned against me. The first real shock didn't come from words, it came from action. The tiny red flags, the subtle manipulations, had been leading to this moment, the blatant, crushing display of disregard that left me reeling. It started with the first public humiliation. I had always been proud of my daughter, showing her off to family and friends, celebrating her achievements. But after the lottery win, everything changed. Photos she posted online no longer included me. Stories she shared were filled with luxury, laughter, and people I didn't know, and yet she never mentioned the sacrifices I had made for her. It was like being erased, not just from her life, but from her joy. Then came the cornering moments. She began to make decisions that directly affected me, and when I questioned her, I was met with impatience, a flicker of annoyance or silence. Once, I reminded her about a loan she had co-signed for a family friend, and she snapped. "I'll handle my way. Stop hovering." It wasn't anger, it was calculated. She was asserting control, testing boundaries, and slowly dismantling my authority without a word of apology. The humiliation didn't end there. Close friends and relatives noticed her coldness toward me. Some asked if we had fought. Others whispered behind our backs. I could feel judgment pressing down, but worse was the helplessness. I couldn't make her see me, couldn't remind her that I had always been in her corner. And then came the final blow, the moment that cemented the shift from passive manipulation to outright betrayal. She blocked my number. No explanation. No warning. Just silence. A small sound, a simple gesture, that carried the weight of betrayal so heavy it felt physical. I remember staring at the phone, my hands frozen, heart pounding. The silence screamed louder than any words ever could. That was the moment I realized this wasn't concern, this was strategy. The clarity hit me like a lightning bolt. All the subtleties, all the fake concern, all the dismissive gestures, they weren't accidental. They were carefully designed to distance me, to make me doubt myself, to isolate me. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this strategy had been in place far longer than I had imagined. The days that followed were filled with anguish. She flaunted her wealth, made bold decisions without consulting me, and continued to act as if I didn't exist. I tried to reach her, left voicemails that went unanswered, sent texts that remained unread. I even visited her apartment once, hoping for a chance to talk, only to be politely turned away by a doorman who barely knew me. The sting of rejection was sharp, and the humiliation was public. Every interaction, or lack thereof, built the case that I was no longer part of her world. And yet, beneath the surface of anger and sadness, a seed of suspicion began to grow. Something didn't add up. Her behavior, the timing of the lottery, the sudden coldness, it all hinted at a bigger story, one I couldn't see yet. I found myself replaying every interaction, every conversation. Why had she become so distant? Why the dismissiveness, the arrogance, the casual cruelty? My mind raced through scenarios, each more unsettling than the last. And through it all, the one truth remained. I had been blindsided. The daughter I had nurtured, loved, and protected was now standing on the other side of a chasm she had built herself, and it was filled with wealth, power, and a detachment I could barely comprehend. Friends tried to comfort me, but their words were hollow against the reality of my isolation. I felt trapped in a cruel paradox. The daughter I had given everything to was now someone I didn't recognize, and every attempt to reach her only reminded me of the distance between us. The escalation continued in small, relentless ways. Invitations ignored, family gatherings skipped, and social media posts flaunting her fortune while my existence seemed invisible. The anger and humiliation began to ferment, and I realized that this wasn't just a personal blow. It was a test of my resilience, my patience, and my capacity to fight back. By the end of the week, it was clear. The rules had changed. She had taken control, wielding her money and newfound independence like a weapon, and I was left to watch, powerless, as the person I loved most seemed to slip through my fingers. Every glance at her social media, every passing mention by a mutual friend, reinforced the same brutal truth. The little girl I had raised was gone. And yet, as the final blows landed, a strange clarity emerged. If this was strategy, then strategy could be turned against her. If she thought she had won, she hadn't seen the quiet determination forming in me. The humiliation, the anger, the despair, they weren't the end. They were the prelude to something far greater, something that would shift the power completely. Little did she know, the storm she had begun by blocking me was about to come full circle. And when it did, the consequences would leave her scrambling, vulnerable, and, for the first time, truly aware of the impact of her actions. I remember that night like a nightmare that refused to end. The house was quiet, too quiet, and every tick of the clock reminded me of her absence, her rejection, the cold wall she had built between us. I sank onto the couch, feeling every ounce of exhaustion, sorrow, and disbelief crushing me. The humiliation wasn't just emotional, it was physical. I barely slept, wandering the house like a ghost of my former self, staring at the walls that had witnessed her childhood laughter. The empty kitchen echoed with memories of the breakfasts I had made, the small smiles she had given me when I was too tired to smile myself. And now, nothing. Silence. Distance. Pain that radiated from my chest down to my fingertips. I couldn't eat. The food sat untouched. Every bite seemed meaningless. I stared at the cold, bland meals I had prepared for myself, trying to summon some sense of normalcy, but it didn't exist. Even the night air seemed to mock me, cold and biting against my skin as I walked the quiet streets near my home, hoping that movement would distract me from the whirlwind inside. Memories flooded back, relentless and cruel. I remembered the first time she had smiled at me with pure joy, the tiny victories I had celebrated on her behalf, the tears I had wiped from her cheeks during heartbreaks that seemed so trivial at the time. And now, she had turned that trust and love into weapons against me. She didn't need me anymore, or so she thought. I felt powerless in a way I had never experienced. Every phone call I made went unanswered. Every text remained unread. Even reaching out to mutual friends yielded nothing. She had built a wall not just between us, but around herself. I had been erased. I was invisible. The physical exhaustion matched the emotional toll. My body ached from restless nights. My eyes were heavy from crying, my hands trembled, and I could barely keep myself upright. I wandered to the local diner, hoping to find some semblance of comfort, some connection with the world outside the walls of my pain. But even there, the laughter of strangers, the casual conversations, reminded me of what I'd lost, the presence of someone who mattered more than anything else in the world. How did I let this happen? I whispered into the empty air, my voice cracking with despair. The question lingered, impossible to answer. I had trusted, loved, and guided her with everything I had, and still, this betrayal had happened. I had believed that love alone could shield her from making mistakes, from drifting away, from allowing pride or money to cloud her judgment. But I was wrong. The nights blurred together. I remember sitting in a cold, dimly lit motel for one evening, needing to escape the memories of our home. The place that now felt like a mausoleum of my own heartbreak. The walls smelled faintly of mildew, and the sheets were rough against my skin. Each sound outside, the honk of a distant car, the chatter of strangers, felt like a reminder that life continued, indifferent to my suffering. I could feel every tiny failure weighing down on me. Every moment I had thought I was guiding her, every lesson I had taught, every word of love I had offered. It felt meaningless now. And the most painful realization was that she didn't even seem to notice. She had moved on, embracing her newfound wealth, friends, and freedom without a backward glance. I sank to the floor, the cold seeping through my clothes, mirroring the emptiness in my chest. The reality was brutal. I was alone, isolated, and powerless. The person I had sacrificed everything for, the person who had been my joy and my purpose, had rejected me, replacing love with silence and trust with distance. Yet, amid the despair, a faint spark of something else began to flicker, anger, clarity, and a stubborn refusal to let this story end in defeat. I began to replay every interaction in my mind, every subtle manipulation, every dismissive comment, every red flag I had overlooked. Something didn't sit right. This sudden transformation, this cold rejection, it wasn't just about money. There was something more, a hidden motive, a secret plan, a truth I had yet to uncover. The emotional collapse was complete, but it planted the seeds for the next chapter. I realized that this rock bottom, the emptiness, the despair, the helplessness, was not the end. It was the moment before transformation, the point at which a victim can either surrender or rise. And in that quiet, cold moment, sitting alone with nothing but my thoughts, I made a silent vow. I would find the truth. I would understand what had driven her to this, and I would reclaim the power that had been so carelessly stripped from me. This was the fall, the lowest point, the raw exposure of my pain. But it was also the turning point, because sometimes it is only at the bottom that you can see the path forward. It started with a memory, a small, seemingly insignificant detail that refused to leave my mind. A friend had mentioned seeing her with someone I didn't know, someone who seemed to whisper in her ear, guiding her actions. At first, I dismissed it. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, hadn't I always trusted her judgment? But the thought lingered, gnawing at the edge of my consciousness. Then came the inconsistencies. A text she sent saying she was at a friend's house, only for a neighbor to mention seeing her elsewhere. a purchase she claimed was for herself, but the receipts suggested something else entirely. Little things at first, easily dismissed, until they began stacking like bricks against a wall I hadn't realized was crumbling. Something didn't feel right. The coldness, the arrogance, the sudden distancing. It was all too carefully orchestrated. It wasn't rebellion or youthful independence. It was deliberate. The more I replayed the days leading up to the block, the more it became clear. Someone, or something, was influencing her, shaping her actions, keeping me out of the loop. I began to notice subtle signs I had overlooked before. Her conversations, though casual, sometimes included phrases that didn't make sense, references I couldn't place. Her body language shifted in ways I hadn't seen since she was a small child hiding a secret. And each time I tried to ask, her answers were clipped, rehearsed, or simply absent. The more I observed, the more I realized that the lottery win wasn't just a windfall, it had made her a target. And in her excitement, in her trust, she had opened herself to manipulation. Someone was taking advantage of her naivety, her excitement, and her sudden wealth. And that someone wasn't just a stranger, it could be someone very close, someone she trusted. I started keeping notes, recording dates, conversations, and transactions that didn't add up. The tiniest detail mattered. A message sent at an odd hour, a phone call that ended abruptly, a friend whose name I had never heard before. Each anomaly became a clue, a breadcrumb leading toward a truth I wasn't ready to confront, but that I couldn't ignore. A memory resurfaced. The first time she had asked me to trust her judgment completely, to step back and let her handle something on her own. I had smiled and nodded, proud of her independence. But now that moment took on a different meaning. It wasn't just independence. It had been the start of a carefully constructed separation, a way to isolate me from the decisions that mattered most. I knew then that I couldn't remain passive. This was no longer just about heartbreak or humiliation. It was about uncovering the truth, protecting my daughter, and understanding the forces at play. The person I had thought she was, the confident, independent woman, might not even be acting entirely of her own will. Every late night, I spent reviewing messages. Every subtle clue I traced, every conversation I overheard, fueled a growing determination. I couldn't go back to being powerless. I needed clarity, proof, and guidance. I needed someone who could help me see the unseen, connect the dots, and expose the manipulations that had brought us to this brink. The suspicion wasn't just about doubt anymore. It was about strategy. I realized that understanding the root of the problem was the first step toward reclaiming control. And with each passing hour, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, revealing a picture that was far more complicated and far more dangerous than I had imagined. By the end of that week, I was no longer just a mother in despair. I was an investigator, a strategist, someone preparing for the confrontation that would eventually lead to truth, justice, and the ultimate reversal of power. Little did I know, the next step, the appearance of someone who could reveal hidden truths, would change everything. What I thought I knew about the situation, about her, and about the forces surrounding her, was about to be turned upside down. Just when I felt like I was spiraling into despair, someone unexpected appeared, a figure who would change everything. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Adeni, someone I had known for years, always warm, observant, and quietly sharp. I had often dismissed her advice as casual chatter, but that day, her words struck like lightning. "Cynthia," she said, her tone gentle but firm, "you're looking at this all wrong. You're seeing your daughter, but not the forces around her." At first, I didn't understand. Forces around her? What could she possibly mean? But as she began to speak, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Mrs. Adeni had always had a knack for noticing the small things. The tiny patterns in people's behavior that others missed. And now, she was pointing out details I had ignored, signs that were hiding in plain sight. She showed me messages, subtle changes in tone and content, patterns in her social media posts that hinted at influence from someone else. She explained how sudden wealth can expose even the closest family to manipulation, and how isolation is often the first step in a larger plan. Every word made sense, each piece of evidence painting a picture I hadn't yet fully grasped. "Cynthia, your daughter hasn't blocked you because she hates you," Mrs. Adeni said softly. "She's being controlled. Someone is guiding her actions, and she's too proud or too unaware to see it." I felt my heart tighten. I had never considered that my daughter's behavior might not be entirely her own. But as I reviewed the notes I had been keeping, the strange messages, the odd purchases, the sudden distancing, it all began to align with what Mrs. Adeni was telling me. The red flags I had noticed, the subtle manipulations, the dismissals, they weren't just signs of rebellion. They were evidence of influence. Then she handed me something I hadn't expected, a set of records, receipts, and screenshots she had quietly gathered over the past few weeks. Evidence. Concrete proof that someone had been interacting with my daughter behind the scenes, shaping her decisions, and ensuring I remained on the outside. That's when I realized everything they told me was a lie. I whispered, clutching the papers to my chest. Every feeling of helplessness, every tear I had shed, every moment of despair, it had been built on deception. And now, I could see it clearly. Mrs. Adeni didn't just point out the problem, she also guided me toward solutions. She helped me organize the evidence, advised me on how to approach conversations without triggering defensiveness, and even suggested ways to subtly test the situation to confirm my suspicions. For the first time since the block, I felt like I had a path forward, a strategy, and a glimmer of hope. Her mentorship transformed my mindset. I was no longer just a hurt mother, isolated and powerless. I was becoming a detective, a strategist, someone ready to uncover the truth and take control. The helper had unlocked the next stage of the journey, providing clarity and empowerment at the exact moment I needed it most. The stakes changed immediately. I could see how carefully orchestrated the deception had been, and how much was riding on what I would do next. My daughter, my relationships, and even the people manipulating her were all part of a web I was now determined to unravel. And as I looked at Mrs. Adeni, I realized something crucial. Help can come from the most unexpected places, but it is only effective when you are ready to see it. I was ready. I was done being passive. The revelation was profound. With the guidance of a mentor who could see what I could not, the puzzle pieces began to align, and the first big reveal, the hidden truth behind her actions and the forces shaping her, was within reach. What had seemed like hopelessness was now the prelude to empowerment, strategy, and the unraveling of deception. Little did I know, the first big reveal would be far more shocking than I could imagine, flipping the story on its head and setting the stage for consequences that would leave my daughter scrambling and desperate for answers. The day I uncovered the truth is etched into my memory, like a scar I will never forget. It wasn't a confrontation, nor a dramatic discovery in some hidden corner. It was quiet, methodical, and devastating. With Mrs. Adeni's guidance, I began to go through the evidence. The messages, receipts, and screenshots she had collected. I was looking for patterns, for inconsistencies, for anything that would explain the sudden distance, the coldness, the arrogance. And then I saw it, a series of transactions, messages, and plans that didn't belong to my daughter. Someone else had been orchestrating her every move. The proof was irrefutable. There was a financial advisor she had trusted implicitly, someone who had gained her confidence just before the lottery win. Behind the smiles and polite emails, he had been siphoning information, giving selective advice, and isolating her from anyone who could question him, including me. The magnitude of the deception hit me like a freight train. I remember whispering, almost in disbelief. That's when I realized everything they told me was a lie. Not only had my daughter been misled, but she had unknowingly become part of a scheme that could have cost her everything. The money, the friends, the sense of independence she flaunted. It had been manipulated, choreographed by someone who had played every angle carefully. The betrayal was double-edged. My daughter hadn't acted with intent to hurt me, but the consequences of her actions, guided by someone else, had left me humiliated, isolated, and questioning every moment of our relationship. And worse, She didn't even know she was being used. As I pieced together the timeline, I discovered hidden contracts, secret investments, and a web of manipulation that extended beyond our family. It was like watching a shadow puppet show where my daughter was the main actor, and I had been kept in the dark. The person she trusted most, the one who had promised to manage her wealth responsibly, had been pulling the strings, pushing her away from me and anyone else who might see through the plan. The implications were staggering. Every text she had ignored, every invitation she had declined, every cold response, it had been carefully engineered. And while she thought she was asserting independence, she was actually trapped in a silent, invisible prison built around her by someone she had welcomed into her life. I felt a mixture of relief and fury. Relief, because I now understood that her coldness wasn't personal. It wasn't rejection but manipulation. Fury, because the person responsible had weaponized her trust, her innocence, and her success for their own gain. And in that fury, I felt the first spark of my next move, reclaiming control, exposing the deceit, and protecting my daughter from further harm. Mrs. Adeni helped me connect the dots. Every clue, every red flag, every subtle manipulation we had noticed earlier made sense now. The timeline aligned perfectly, and for the first time in days, I felt like I had a plan. The injustice, the humiliation, the heartbreak, they were no longer a labyrinth trapping me in despair. They were evidence, tools, and leverage. The first big reveal wasn't just about uncovering the manipulator, it was about clarity, empowerment, and a shift in perspective. I saw my daughter not as a betrayer, but as a victim of circumstance and deceit. And that understanding gave me both compassion and resolve. I realized then that the story wasn't over. The revelation had answered some questions, but it had opened new ones. How would I confront the manipulator? How would I help my daughter see the truth? And what consequences would be unleashed once the deception was exposed? By the end of that day, I knew the power dynamics had changed. I was no longer helpless or blind. I had evidence, strategy, and guidance. The next steps, consequences, confrontations, and justice were mine to orchestrate. And for the first time, I could feel the balance slowly tipping in my favor. The first big reveal had flipped everything. The humiliation, the betrayal, the cold isolation, they were now the stage for justice, exposure, and a power shift that would leave the manipulator scrambling. And my daughter, unaware of the extent of the deception, was about to discover a truth that would change everything. The moment I confronted the manipulator, everything began to unravel. The carefully constructed facade crumbled under the weight of evidence we had gathered. Emails, messages, and transaction records. The proof was undeniable. Suddenly, the calm, confident person who had orchestrated so much chaos was visibly rattled. It started with the excuses, weak and fumbling. It wasn't what it looked like. I was just helping. Every word was met with silence, my eyes and Mrs. Adeni's evidence doing the talking. The manipulator's cool demeanor cracked, revealing fear, guilt, and a desperate hope that I might be convinced to let it slide. But the truth was unshakable. Next came the practical consequences. Bank cards that had been used to manipulate my daughter were frozen. Accounts under suspicious names were flagged. Every move that had been carefully hidden was suddenly under scrutiny. The manipulator's control, once absolute, slipped through their fingers like sand. Panic replaced composure. Calls went unanswered. Attempts to cover tracks were discovered, and lies that had taken weeks to weave unraveled in minutes. My daughter, initially confused, watched as the truth emerged. She realized she had been guided, influenced, and misled, often without knowing it. The anger and betrayal she felt toward me, toward her mother, began to dissipate as understanding took its place. For the first time in days, there was clarity in the chaos. Family and friends, once caught in the manipulator's subtle web, began to question everything. Whispers turned into confrontations. Friends who had been complicit in hiding information found themselves cornered. The manipulator's sphere of influence collapsed under scrutiny, and the truth shone through like a spotlight, exposing every deceit. Public humiliation followed swiftly. The manipulator, who had presented themselves as trustworthy and intelligent, found their reputation crumbling. Social media posts celebrating supposed successes were scrutinized. Associates distanced themselves. And the most satisfying moment came when the manipulator attempted to regain control, only to be met with facts, evidence, and unyielding resolve. The dramatic confrontation I had once feared became inevitable. Standing face to face with the person who had caused so much chaos, I felt neither fear nor hesitation. "This ends now," I said firmly, the evidence laid bare. "No more manipulation, no more lies, no more control. Everything you did is exposed." The manipulator tried to protest, to twist the narrative, but the weight of truth was undeniable. Every family member, every friend, every document confirmed the story. The power that had once belonged to them now shifted decisively into my hands. Police involvement became necessary. Reports were filed, investigations opened, and legal consequences began to take shape. The manipulator's carefully hidden actions were now documented and verified. What had been a private battle became a public reckoning, and the panic in their eyes was unmistakable. And my daughter, my precious child who had blocked me, ignored me, and seemed lost in arrogance, now saw clearly. She cried, apologized, and clung to me, overwhelmed by the betrayal she had unknowingly endured. The reversal of power was complete. The manipulator had lost, the truth had emerged, and the mother-daughter bond, tested to its limits, began to heal. Even the smallest details mattered. Calls that had once been ignored were returned. Messages left unanswered were now met with clarity and explanation. The manipulator, who had believed themselves untouchable, was reduced to panic, desperation, and public exposure. As the dust settled, I realized something profound. Justice wasn't just about exposing lies or punishing wrongdoers. It was about reclaiming agency, power, and dignity. It was about transforming despair into action, humiliation into triumph, and betrayal into clarity. The consequences were total. The manipulator's lies, schemes, and illusions disintegrated, leaving them vulnerable and accountable. Bank accounts frozen, relationships fractured, reputation destroyed. And in that moment, I understood the true power of evidence, strategy, and resolve. The first layer of the storm had passed, but the story wasn't over. Just as I thought the worst had been revealed, another shocking truth loomed, a second secret, more devastating than the first, waiting to be uncovered. The tension wasn't resolved. It was about to escalate again. And that's where the next stage begins. Twist number 2. The revelation that would shock my daughter, redefine the stakes, and force choices that would test every ounce of courage, strategy, and love we had left. Just when I thought the nightmare had finally reached its end, the second blow came. And this one didn't just shake me, it almost brought me to my knees. I had believed exposing the manipulator was the end of the deceit. I had believed my daughter was finally safe. I had believed the worst was behind us. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done revealing the truth. It started subtly, just a single line buried in a bank statement, one I almost overlooked, a recurring deduction under an unfamiliar name. I thought it was just another leftover transaction created by the manipulator. But something felt off. It was too clean, too perfectly timed, too consistent. Something inside me whispered, "Don't ignore this." So I dug deeper. At first, the trail felt like a dead end. But then another clue. A set of email exchanges my daughter had archived unintentionally. The language was formal, rehearsed, and dripping with psychological control tactics. But what made my blood run cold was the name at the bottom of the email. Not the manipulator. Someone else. Someone worse. Someone my daughter trusted even more. My hands shook as I traced the name. Could it be a mistake? A coincidence? But the more I uncovered, the more horrifying the truth became. This wasn't just a single manipulator preying on my daughter's innocence. This was a coordinated plan, a two-person scheme, layered so perfectly that the first manipulator was designed to take the fall. The real mastermind was someone else entirely. The second accomplice was the quiet one. The one who never asked for anything, never raised suspicion, never seemed invested. The one always smiling politely at family gatherings, offering unsolicited advice, always hanging at the edges, observing, analyzing, waiting. And now all the pieces clicked. The reason my daughter had insisted she needed space. The reason she blocked my number. The reason her phone was suddenly filled with new security apps and filters. The reason she believed I was a threat to her independence. It wasn't just the manipulator's voice in her head. It was this shadow figure. Subtle, strategic, terrifyingly intelligent. This second person had fed information to the manipulator, coached them on what to say, and built the emotional wedge between me and my daughter brick by brick. They manipulated her mindset while the first manipulator handled her finances. It was a perfect orchestration, one focusing on her money, the other focusing on her emotions. The dual attack was meant to isolate her completely. And then, the most devastating discovery. My daughter had unknowingly signed a joint business authorization agreement with the second accomplice, a document that, if activated, would have given them legal access to almost 40% of her winnings.
40.
Not 4. Not 14.
40.
The plan had been simple. Get my daughter alone. Take control of her emotional decisions. Slide financial documents under the radar. When the dust settled, they would quietly drain her fortune, leaving her broke, confused, and isolated. And I, the mother? The only person who would have fought like a lioness? They made sure I was the first person removed from the picture. The manipulation hadn't just been cruelty. It had been strategy, weaponized, calculated, intentional. My daughter, for the first time since everything began, broke down when I showed her the truth. She stared at the document, her hands shaking violently, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I didn't sign this knowingly," she whispered. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to run into my room during thunderstorms, scared, fragile, desperately needing reassurance. And I held her, because despite everything, she was my child. But I wasn't just comforting her. I was planning, calculating,
preparing the next strike.
Because this second twist changed everything. The fight ahead wasn't just about exposing a manipulator, it was about dismantling an entire scheme. The accomplice was smarter, quieter, and more dangerous. And now that they would realize we were onto them, they would not sit quietly. This wasn't just a problem. This was war. A war I was now ready for. With the evidence in my hands, with my daughter finally seeing the truth, with anger and clarity burning through me, the next stage was inevitable. Facing a choice that would determine everything. Do we expose the accomplice immediately and risk retaliation? Or gather more evidence, wait for the perfect moment, and hit them so hard that they can never rise again? Either choice would shape the rest of our lives. Either choice would carry consequences. But one thing was certain. The power was shifting, and it was shifting toward me. I stared at the evidence spread across the table, my hands trembling, my mind racing. Every fact, every transaction, every hidden message pointed toward one inevitable truth. Exposing the hidden accomplice would bring justice, but it would also shatter lives, tear families apart, and possibly put my daughter in the spotlight she wasn't prepared for. I realized I had only two choices, and either one would change everything. Option 1. Go public immediately. Confront both the manipulator and their hidden accomplice, alert the authorities, and make the deception known to everyone. Justice would be swift, undeniable, and irreversible, but the cost was high. My daughter would be dragged into a public scandal. Friends and family would take sides. The manipulator's accomplice might retaliate, creating more chaos. The fallout could be brutal. Option 2. Play it strategically. Gather more proof, carefully maneuver the pieces, and ensure that when the revelation came, it could not be denied or twisted. This path would require patience, discipline, and restraint. I would have to hide my emotions, mask my intentions, and act with surgical precision. But if done right, it could protect my daughter, ensure justice, and minimize collateral damage. I leaned back in my chair, recalling the long nights of despair, the humiliation, the heartbreak. I remembered every tear, every sleepless night, every moment I had felt powerless. And I knew something critical. I could not allow fear or impatience to dictate my actions. My daughter entered the room, hesitant, sensing the tension. She looked at me with a mix of confusion and worry. "Mom, what's happening?" she asked softly. I met her eyes, weighing the consequences of honesty versus protection. "There's more going on than you realize," I said carefully. "Someone has been manipulating you, guiding your actions without you even knowing. And there's another layer, another person involved." Her eyes widened. "Another one?" "Yes," I said. "And I need to decide how to handle this carefully. I want to protect you, but I also need to make sure justice is done." The weight of the choice settled heavily on my shoulders. If I acted too soon, I risked exposing her to unnecessary pain and public scrutiny. If I waited, the manipulator and their accomplice could cover their tracks or escape accountability. Every decision carried consequences, and every consequence carried risk. I thought about the lives entangled in this web, the friends who had unknowingly been used, the family members who could be caught in the crossfire, and my daughter, whose trust one had to rebuild. The moral dilemma wasn't just about justice. It was about protection, timing, and the ethical responsibility of wielding knowledge that could change everything. I took a deep breath and made my decision. I would act strategically. I would gather every last piece of proof, set the stage so that the manipulator and their accomplice could not escape, and protect my daughter while ensuring the truth was revealed in a way that could not be manipulated. It wasn't the easy path, and it wouldn't be without tension, suspense, or risk. But it was the right path. The high-stakes dilemma had been faced, and I had chosen strategy over impulse, patience over reaction, and justice with protection over reckless exposure. I looked at my daughter, taking her hand gently. "We're in this together," I said. "And when the time comes, you'll see the truth. But we have to be smart, calm, and precise." In that moment, I felt a transformation stirring inside me. The despair, the humiliation, the betrayal, they were no longer shackles. They were catalysts, forging a version of myself stronger, wiser, and more resolute. The power would shift, the manipulator and accomplice would be exposed, and my daughter would emerge not just unharmed, but empowered. The high-stakes dilemma had been resolved, not by force, not by emotion, but by clarity, strategy, and moral courage. And with the path set, the story now moved toward the ultimate showdown, the power shift, where control, justice, and empowerment would be fully realized. The moment had finally arrived. Every hour of observation, every note, every piece of evidence, every sleepless night, it all led to this. I was no longer the passive, betrayed mother. I was the strategist, the orchestrator, and the force that would tip the balance of power once and for all. I started by confronting the manipulator first, calmly, deliberately, armed with irrefutable evidence. Screenshots, bank statements, messages, all laid out in front of them. There was no room for lies, no space for denial. The manipulator's confident posture faltered, and I could see panic creeping in. They had underestimated the quiet, calculated resolve that had been growing inside me for days. "You thought you could isolate my daughter from me," I said steadily, "but every move you made, every deception, every lie, it's all here. And now, your power is gone." They tried to deflect, stammered excuses, but I was unyielding. Each word, each proof point, was a hammer, dismantling the manipulator's control piece by piece. And as their panic grew, I felt the first rush of empowerment, not just for me, but for my daughter, who had been unaware of the hidden chains around her. Next came the hidden accomplice, the shadow behind the scheme. I approached this confrontation with the same precision, knowing that any misstep could allow them to escape or manipulate the narrative. With Mrs. Adeni by my side, I revealed the layers of evidence that connected them to the manipulator. Their calm veneer cracked instantly. Threats and rationalizations fell flat against the weight of indisputable proof. Authorities were already informed. As police and financial investigators began to intervene, the manipulators' networks collapsed. Bank accounts were frozen, fraudulent transactions reversed, and their credibility destroyed. Colleagues, friends, and even family members who had unknowingly supported the scheme distanced themselves, leaving the manipulators exposed and powerless. Meanwhile, my daughter and I took deliberate steps to reclaim her autonomy and confidence. We reviewed every decision that had been influenced by others, corrected mistakes, and ensured that her independence was authentic this time. The power shift wasn't just about punishing the wrongdoers. It was about restoring agency, control, and dignity to those who had been manipulated. Every strategic call I made strengthened my position. Public exposure of their lies, carefully planned confrontations, and legal actions ensured that justice was comprehensive. The manipulators' attempts to regain control were futile. They had lost the advantage completely. Emotionally, I had transformed. The despair, humiliation, and betrayal that once weighed on me had been replaced by clarity, strength, and confidence. I was no longer a victim. I was a mother, protector, and strategist capable of dismantling schemes that threatened my family. My daughter, too, emerged stronger, aware and empowered, ready to navigate her newfound independence without falling prey to deception again. The manipulators were left scrambling. The balance of power had shifted fully. They were exposed, discredited, and accountable. The authorities ensured that justice would be carried out, and their ability to harm or manipulate was permanently curtailed. In this moment, I realized the true meaning of the power shift. It wasn't just about victory over adversaries. It was about reclaiming control of my life, protecting those I loved, and asserting moral, emotional, and strategic dominance over chaos. The culmination of careful observation, evidence gathering, mentorship, and moral decision-making had led to a complete reversal. I had become stronger than the antagonists in every way, morally, emotionally, and strategically. The fear that had once gripped me was gone, replaced by empowerment and the satisfaction of justice fully realized. The stage was now set for the final resolution. The manipulators had lost their control. My daughter had reclaimed her agency, and I had emerged not just victorious, but transformed. The story was coming to its close, but it would end with a message, a lesson, and a reflection that resonated far beyond our personal ordeal. Life after the storm felt surreal, yet profoundly grounding. The manipulators had been exposed, their schemes dismantled, and justice had been served. My daughter, once distant and unknowingly trapped in deception, now stood before me as her true self, empowered, aware, and grateful. We rebuilt the bond that had been tested to its limits. The walls of mistrust, fear, and hurt slowly crumbled, replaced by honesty, communication, and mutual respect. Each conversation, each gesture, reinforced that no amount of deception could sever the connection between mother and daughter when love was steadfast. Our home, once a silent battlefield of misunderstandings, became a sanctuary again. The laughter, warmth, and shared moments returned, more profound because of the journey we had endured. My daughter's newfound independence was genuine this time, guided not by manipulation, but by understanding, confidence, and clear boundaries. Beyond the personal restoration, I realized the power of vigilance and preparation. The journey had taught me the importance of observation, strategic action, and trusting both instinct and guidance. Mrs. Adeney's mentorship had been invaluable, showing that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources, and that help is most effective when combined with decisive action. The manipulators, meanwhile, faced the full weight of accountability. Legal action, public exposure, and social consequences ensured that their control was broken permanently. The fear, panic, and regret they experienced were a testament to the power of truth, evidence, and moral courage. Watching them confront the consequences was a quiet vindication, a reminder that deceit, no matter how carefully orchestrated, cannot withstand clarity and justice. The experience also transformed my perspective on relationships and trust. I learned that love must be balanced with vigilance, that openness should be tempered with awareness, and that empowerment often requires courage in the face of fear. My daughter and I emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Reflecting on the journey, I understood a fundamental truth. Life will test us, betrayals will challenge us, and deception may blind us, but our response defines our legacy. Choosing strategy over impulse, patience over panic, and empowerment over despair can turn even the darkest moments into opportunities for triumph and growth. And so, the story concludes not with despair, but with hope, strength, and clarity. My daughter and I have learned the true value of trust, the necessity of vigilance, and the power of love fortified by strategy. Life has returned to normalcy, but with new boundaries, a renewed sense of purpose, and an unshakable bond that no deception can break. Before I end, I want to leave a message for anyone watching the story. Betrayal, manipulation, and unexpected challenges are part of life. But remember, no matter how dire the situation, there is always a path to empowerment. Seek guidance, gather evidence, act with strategy, and never allow fear to dictate your decisions. And if you have a story like this, share it in the comments. Your voice deserves to be heard. Your experience may inspire someone else to act, protect themselves, and reclaim the power that life may have temporarily stolen. Because in the end, strength isn't just about surviving the storm. It's about emerging from it stronger, wiser, and more resolute than ever before. This is not just a story of betrayal, manipulation, or money. It's a story of courage, strategy, and love. A story that reminds us that, even in our darkest hours, we have the power to rise, protect those we love, and claim victory over adversity.